Telemetry, Day 61 of the Deep Exploration Mission. The cabin is bathed in a low amber glow, the kind that softens every edge and lets the dark keep its dignity. My desk holds the quiet ritual of the night: journal, fountain pen, a cup of tea, breathing a thin ribbon of steam into the cool air. I cradle the cup for a moment, letting its warmth seep into my palms. Out here, warmth is always borrowed, and perhaps that is why it feels so precious. The ship is steady beneath me. The vibration through the soles of my boots is a familiar promise: forward, onward, gently. Air circulates with a soft constancy, turning the room into a small, breathing world of its own. I have grown to love these sounds: engine hum, life support, the faintest current through the bulkheads, each a thread in the tapestry of the voyage. Beyond the viewport, the planet rotates in silence. From this height, its surface is a dim mosaic of shadowed continents and muted seas, their boundaries softened by an atmosphere that glows just enough to prove it is there. Nightside stretches like a velvet cloth. Dayside thins to a pale rind along the limb. The Terminator, day's edge, slides slowly across mountains and plains, a measured movement that could calm even a restless heart. A faint scarf of clouds unwinds across an ocean, catching starlight in delicate strands. I uncap my pen and write, the nib whispering across the page. The atlas of quiet worlds has become my companion. Its blank pages an invitation, its filled ones a memory. Each entry ties the vast to the intimate, starfields to tea, horizons to lamplight, strangers to the shape of my own breath. I record what I can: the planet's soft colors, the graphite texture of its highlands, the thin bluish halo that signals air. The tea carries the smallest taste of leaves dried far from where I am now. It cools as I drink, and the cooling is part of the ceremony, something time does for me while I sit and watch the world turn below. My reflection floats in the viewport as a pale ghost layered over the planet's night. I nod to it, the traveler who keeps me company when even the stars feel distant. Tonight's orbit feels unusually tender, as though the ship and the planet have settled into a private conversation. I mark our altitude and inclination and then leave the numbers where they belong, on the page, not in my chest. In my chest, only the quiet. The sort of quiet that holds rather than empties, a bowl-shaped hush, wide enough for thoughts to sit and cool beside the tea. The planet's poles wear delicate wreaths of light, auroral threads knotted into slow blooming crowns. They appear and fade in breath-like cycles, more shimmer than shape, as though the world is dreaming beneath its own sky. I take another line for the atlas. Polar glow faint, braided, intermittent, tones of pale green and smoky violet, rhythm gentle, no urgency. That last note, no urgency, matters as much as the colors. The Deep Exploration Mission has taught me that quiet facts are still facts, and that calm things deserve their measurements too. I lean closer to the glass, and the cabin's amber glow thins against the darkness. It is astonishing how a world can feel both immense and intimate from orbit, like a book too large to lift, yet easy to read. In one glance, I hold the curvature of an ocean. In another, I track a river's thread through a continent's ribcage. Here, distance is a kindness, smoothing roughness into serenity, turning storms into watercolor gestures, giving the planet space to be beautiful without apology.
I write about the night side lights. There are none. No cities, no lines of fire. This world is unmarked by industry, its darkness complete and unpunctured. A hush leaps from that absence and settles into the cabin with me. I think of Earth's night from orbit, its constellations of human flame. I think of voices, streets, rain sliding down windows, the small chorus of living. Then I return to the world below, unlit and perfectly composed, a sleeping stone under a quilt of air. The ship's clock marks the orbit in soft ticks I can barely hear. I note our position above a plateau whose edges meet the terminator at a right angle, rendering them in delicate relief. Shadows ladder down canyons, ridgelines draw charcoal signatures across the land. I sketch a quick outline for the atlas, not because the drawing will be exact, but because the hand remembers what the eye cannot hold. The act of tracing becomes a second way of seeing. A slender cloud band crosses the limb and turns to silver thread. It seems to drift through the hull and lay itself across my desk, a trick of reflection that makes the room feel as though it is wearing sky. I write that down too, knowing that some details will belong more to poetry than to science, and that the atlas has room for both. Another sip of tea, another line of ink, another glance at the auroral crown. The world below rotates with patient grace, and the ship rides its circumference like a slow heartbeat. My hands relax, the pen grows lighter, and the page gathers a steady, unhurried script. There is a feeling tonight, a sense that the orbit is carrying me toward a listening more than a looking. Sight has done its work, colors noted, features mapped, the calm recognized and returned. Now something quieter asks to be heard. Not sound exactly, not even a signal I could capture, only the suggestion that the hull, the air, the engine hum, and the planet's own veil of light are aligning in a way that invites attention. The sort of attention that leans forward without leaving its seat. I let the lamp burn lower until its glow is only a gentle circle around the journal. The rest of the cabin gives itself to shadow. The planet, relieved of the room's reflection, grows sharper, more itself. Nightside shows as deep velvet. Dayside thins to pearl. Between them, the world whispers without words, a smooth turning, a measured breath, a promise that whatever comes next will arrive softly. I set the pen across the margin and rest my fingertips against the desk to feel the ship's quiet pulse. Somewhere in that vibration, I imagine a faint reply, like the resonance of a seashell placed against the ear, a memory of distant surf translated into starlight. Whether it belongs to the planet below, to the solar wind above, or simply to the mind that wants to listen, I cannot say. But I will follow it, gently, and let it lead me into the next page. The orbit holds, the tea cools, the world turns, and the night, generous as ever, makes room for one more line in the atlas of quiet worlds. The pen rests in my hand, but the page waits. What fills the space now is not sight, but sensation, something subtler than light, something that seems to arrive through the ship itself. It begins as the faintest irregularity in the hum I know so well. Not a disturbance, not a threat, only a rhythm layered upon rhythm, softer than breath, like the hushed syllables of a language not yet understood. The instruments register at first, a delicate shift in the magnetic field, fluctuations too minor to trouble the systems. Numbers roll across the display, steady, precise, but my attention drifts instead to what it feels like, The hull carries it inward, not as sound, but as a vibration so gentle it almost escapes notice. And yet, once perceived, it lingers. I lean my palm against the desk, and the faintest pattern rises through the metal. A pulse, a pause, a sequence that repeats with the patience of tides. Whispers.
I close my eyes, and the hum of the ship blends with this new arrival. Together, they weave a texture that feels less mechanical than alive. I imagine solar winds brushing against the planet's magnetic veil, auroras stitching themselves into luminous knots, currents of charged dust moving like unseen rivers. The science is there, but the poetry comes easier. The universe speaks in hushes, and tonight, I am its listener. The resonance does not intrude, it enfolds. It feels as though the ship itself has joined orbit not only around the planet, but within its rhythm, leaning into its song. My heartbeat slows to match, and I write slower too, the nib trailing across the page like a voice syncing with a chorus. I describe what the instruments suggest: fluctuations tied to the auroral crowns, charged particles swept in arcs, frequencies faint but measurable. But then I set the instruments aside, because the log must hold what numbers cannot, what it feels like to sit inside the whispers of a world. The air in the cabin seems to carry it too, a sense of presence, not audible, but undeniable. Like sitting in a forest and realizing the trees are speaking with their silence. The whispers change slightly as the orbit continues. At times they stretch long and slow, at times they cluster closer together, but always they remain gentle, as though mindful of the fragility of the listener. I sip the last of my tea, now gone cool, and even the ripple of liquid in the cup seems to align with the unseen rhythm. I laugh quietly to myself, the sound small and out of place, yet even it seems to dissolve into the hush. Perhaps this is only interpretation, only the mind painting meaning where there is none. But meaning is what we carry. Meaning is what the atlas demands. And so I write. Planetary resonance felt through hull. Rhythms suggestive of whispers. Tone gentle, patient, enveloping. The words are plain, but my hand lingers after them, unwilling to break the cadence. Through the viewport, the auroras shift, faint threads weaving and unwinding. I imagine them as the visible counterpart of what I feel, the light of whispers, the glow of hushes made visible against the night. Each ribbon seems to curl with intention, though I know it is only physics at play. Still, the effect is undeniable, a language of motion written across the polar sky, carried into the orbiting shell of my ship. Time stretches, folds. I cannot tell how long I have listened, only that the whispers continue, neither louder nor softer, neither nearer nor farther. They simply are, constant, patient, like the quiet companionship of a friend who does not need to speak. I let the pen rest again, my fingers pressed lightly against the desk, feeling the rhythm as though it were the pulse of the voyage itself. And I whisper back, though no sound leaves my lips. I hear you. Orbit carries me onward, unhurried. Below, the planet reveals itself in fragments, as if the world is turning slowly to share each of its faces with me in confidence. The dayline slides across its body, peeling night from day in delicate motion. Nightside is velvet, complete in its darkness. Dayside is pearl, softened by the thin veil of atmosphere. Between them, the whispers continue,
steady, unbroken, and folding. I widen the viewport and more of the surface falls into view. Plains stretch in muted shades, some ridged like the folds of an ancient scroll, others smooth and pale as worn stone. I see faint seas, if they are seas at all, mirroring a dim reflection of the star field. Clouds drift lazily, their edges blurred, as though even the weather here knows no hurry. Auroras bloom again at the poles, ribbons of pale green and smoky violet, like brushstrokes upon dark canvas. They shimmer in breath-like rhythms, and I wonder if they are the visible counterpart of the whispers moving through my ship. Light above, resonance below. Two halves of a conversation the planet conducts with the void. I make notes for the atlas. Surface muted, low reflectivity, atmosphere thin but present, aurora activity steady, polar crowns shifting with rhythm. My hand moves carefully, not only to record, but to honor. These words will outlast me, stored in the atlas so others may know that this world once whispered into silence. Instruments suggest mineral plains, perhaps iron-rich. They suggest an atmosphere faint but capable of glow. They suggest dust storms so fine they pass invisibly across continents. And yet what I see, what I feel is not suggestion but presence. A world that holds its secrets in quiet, choosing not to shout, but to murmur. As orbit continues, I pass over a region where mountains claw at the terminator. Their peaks catch the last sweep of sunlight, glowing like embers laid carefully across stone. Shadows fall long and deep, filling valleys like ink. For a moment, it looks as though the mountains themselves are listening, leaning toward the whispers that encircle them. I imagine walking there, boots pressing into dust untouched by any other step, the air faint but real against my visor. The sky would be pale, the aurora's faint smudges overhead, the surface trembling with the same resonance I now feel through the hull. It would be silence, yes, but not emptiness. A silence that speaks, a hush that listens back. I bring the ship into a lower orbit, careful, steady, and the surface grows sharper. Patterns emerge across the plains, faint striations, winding lines that may be geological or perhaps remnants of ancient flows. They stretch toward horizons I cannot see, curving gently as if the world were sketching its own diary. I add them to the atlas with the note, surface marked by faint winding patterns, origins unknown, suggest resemblance to handwriting upon stone. The whispers shift as the orbit dips. They grow slightly fuller, layered, not louder but more textured, like the difference between one voice and a chorus. It is still calm, still enfolding, but now with harmonics, tones that seem to overlap and ripple. I imagine them as the stories of the world itself, layered over millennia, woven into the magnetic veil, carried outward for whoever will listen. The ship hums, the desk vibrates faintly, and the page gathers my words. Yet I know the atlas cannot hold the full measure of this moment. Data cannot capture whispers. Numbers cannot carry lullabies. Still, I write, because to write is to listen more closely. Through the viewport, dayside brightens as I cross into sunlight. The planet's surface gleams faintly, a pale reflection cast back into space. The auroras fade against the stronger glow, but the resonance remains, unbroken, moving through me as though orbit itself were a song.
I close my eyes for a moment and imagine Earth, the rush of wind in trees, the chorus of rivers, the rise and fall of voices layered in conversation. Those were whispers too, though I did not name them so at the time. Perhaps all sound is whisper when heard with care. Perhaps this world below, silent yet not silent, only reminds me of what I once knew.
I open my eyes again, and the planet waits, unchanging, patient. The whispers continue, constant as heartbeat. I let them pass through me. Let them shape the ink upon the page. Let them remind me that orbit is not only motion, but communion. The orbit draws me onward, but the resonance lingers, weaving itself into thought. It is not a message in the way we would speak of messages, not a code or signal waiting to be cracked. It is something simpler. Presence made audible, patience made perceptible. The planet whispers because that is what it does, not because it expects reply. I sit with that understanding, and I realize how rare it is to truly listen. On Earth, sound was always around me. Voices, wind, rivers, the thousand small noises of life. Out here, the hum of the ship has been my constant, and silence has carried me the rest of the way. And yet now, in this orbit, I hear again, though it is not hearing with ears, but with skin, with pen, with the part of the mind that waits instead of reaching.
The whispers remind me of childhood nights. I remember lying awake, hearing the murmur of wind through leaves outside my window. I never thought of it as language, yet I understood it all the same. The world turning softly, the night holding steady. What I feel here is the same. Wind made into resonance, leaves transformed into auroras, a planet telling its story to anyone who will rest long enough to hear it. I write in the atlas, planetary presence, gentle, resonance, steady, whispers suggestive of breath. Listeners roll only to receive. The words look small on the page, but they are the best I can offer. The rest must remain between the world and me. I set my pen down and lean back, letting the chair hold me. The amber lamp is low now, the cup empty, the cabin quiet, but for the hum and the whispers entwined. Through the viewport, the planet slides beneath me, its surface dim and patient. The auroras shimmer faintly again at the poles, ribbons dissolving into darkness. The whispers soften, or perhaps I am only drifting deeper into them. They feel less like vibrations now and more like memory, as though the ship has carried them inward, etched them into its own rhythm. Even when they fade, I know they will remain, lingering in the silence, waiting to be heard again.
I think of the atlas of quiet worlds, how each entry is a kind of listening, not only to what is seen, but to what is felt, to what cannot be measured, but must still be remembered. This world will be in its pages now, not as a loud discovery, not as a triumph, but as a whisper. And sometimes, whispers endure longer than shouts. My eyes grow heavy, though the orbit continues.
The pen rests. The lamp glows faintly, casting one last pool of light across the journal. I whisper softly into the cabin. Thank you. Not for revelation, not for answers, but for company, for the hush that has carried me, for the whispers that will travel with me long after I leave this orbit. I close the journal. The ship hums on. The planet turns below, steady and unchanged. And the whispers fade, not into absence, but into the hum, into memory, into the slow rhythm of rest. End of log.